When the CMC handed down its report into the police investigation of a death in custody on Palm Island, it resonated with one Gold Coast family who had also lost a son. His death was among a number of fatal shootings by police investigated by the state coroner 2 years ago. Those cases all involved people with a mental illness. The inquiry raised serious concerns about mental health services and triggered some major changes in that sector. The coroner also looked into the handling of the incidents by police. He recognised the difficulties police face in dealing with mental illness. And as Kathy McLeish explains, the coroner found the police investigations were fair and unbiased, but he also raised concerns about adherence to police procedures. This is the first of a two-part report.
Jan and Lee Keelton say they've been fighting the system for longer than they care to remember.
It puts you through incredible strain to go through something like this. You can never replace somebody that's taken away from you, so we'll live with that forever.
For many years they've struggled with the health system to help their son.
Here we have quite a lot of the family pictures that we had put into this frame.
These photos tell a story of happy family life.
James was a lovely boy who was friendly and helpful and gentle and had the most delicious sense of humour.
But their lives changed course when their son, James Jacobs, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was still a teenager.
It was absolutely tragic. It was something that obviously none of us had been exposed to before. So to see somebody go from the perfect child, as Jan has described him, to somebody who really had no more purpose in life.
There were times when they were all overwhelmed.
It's such a difficult illness to deal with because I think for people who have it, it's very hard to distinguish between what's real and what's not real. Never knowing when something awful might happen to them.
But they learned to manage the psychotic episodes.
It's a time of such irrational behaviour, and the only way to help somebody with psychosis is to be calm and to give them a safe place where they can settle down.
Jan and Lee Keelton say they always feared for their son, but in the end couldn't protect him.
Lee looked out of the window and saw two police officers walking down the garden path, and they knocked at the door. It was about 12:30 at night, and came in and said to us that there had been an attempted carjacking outside Southport Hospital, and James had been shot.
They were devastated and say media headlines added to the horror, but it turned out there had been no carjacking. The coroner found a communication error had led to that report, but the Keeltons say the police didn't return to straighten out the mistake, and it was days before a witness contacted them to tell them there was no carjacking.
The police knew that didn't happen, so there was really no excuse for them to put out that sort of story. First of all to us under those tragic circumstances, and secondly to the media, because all of our friends and family, both here and overseas, were aware of that report in the newspaper. So it was a pretty hard pill to swallow.
James Jacobs was shot in 2005. The coronial inquiry was 3 years later. It was one of 4 cases investigated by the coroner where officers had shot a person with mental illness in order to make recommendations on mental health services and police procedures in such circumstances. The Keeltons say it was during the inquest that they first heard officially there had been no carjacking. The evidence given was that their son had been creating a nuisance while in psychosis and under the influence of drugs. Police found him walking home and approached him from 2 directions. James Jacobs pulled out a knife. The coroner found he moved towards one of the police officers, presenting a very real danger. The other officer shot him.
They approached him with their lights flashing and all the rest of it. He obviously felt threatened and he pulled out a knife. He shouldn't have pulled out a knife, we know that. He was some distance from the police at the time when he did that. They drew their guns and trained them on him as they triangulated him.
And screaming at the top of their lungs, according to them.
Across the 4 cases, the coroner found systemic failures within mental health services and made recommendations. Queensland Health instituted reforms. The coroner found the police had responded professionally to the incidents, but he made some comments about dealing with people in mental crisis. Police policy is to de-escalate the situation and, where possible, call in a specially trained team.
There is always more that can be done. The Queensland Police Service has in fact trained many police around mental health, and they have a project running that has established more than 80 police community liaison officers for mental health across the state. So the Queensland Police Service is actually doing very well in response to mental health, but it's still the case, we think, that they need greater support and training around de-escalation techniques.
The coroner had more concerns with 3 of the police investigations into the shootings. He said investigators allowed their sympathy for the officers involved to affect them, at times asking leading questions like, "You felt you had no option but to shoot." He also found in 3 cases evidence had been removed from the scene before the investigation. In the case of James Jacobs, the coroner said a car was removed because the officers involved were instructed to drive themselves to the station together, and that created the opportunity for collusion and the accidental distortion of their memories. The coroner found Queensland Health had investigated each incident and gone on to make policy changes, but he said the Queensland Police Service had done no review and no feedback had been given to officers involved. The service instead had waited for the inquests. But the coroner found there was no police misconduct. Civil libertarian Terry O'Gorman says police failure to follow operating procedures is unacceptable.
He didn't say that the police actively engaged in misconduct and they hid evidence or burnt evidence or carried evidence away so it couldn't be found by the later investigators. What he was critical of was that well-established procedures that would be followed to the letter if the shooter was a citizen rather than a police officer was not followed, and not followed in a number of incidents.
He says elements of the report are similar to the CMC's report into the death in custody of Cameron Doomadgee.
Unfortunately, over the last 5 to 8 years, not only has nothing changed, not only has the situation not improved for the better, it's going rapidly backwards. The coroner was very critical of the fact that the police investigation was coloured by sympathy for the fellow police officers. There should be a special judicial inquiry into the whole complaints and accountability mechanism in respect of the Queensland Police Service. It must be fixed up because the problem year by year is getting worse.
Lee and Jan Keelton want to see changes too, including strict adherence to police operating procedures.
We, as members of the public, deserve a police service that stands up to scrutiny.
The Queensland Police Service has said it continues to commit training and resources to mental health issues and has developed a number of initiatives in response to the coroner's report. We'll hear more from the police next week.